This summer, I got hooked on a song that most of us, I suspect, have never heard of. It's a song that was released this past year called Rich Men North of Richmond. Raise your hand if you've heard of the song. Got a couple of them, okay. Figured we're out there somewhere. It made history as the song ever first debut of all songs ever, #1 on the Billboard 100 without any prior chart entries, meaning this artist had never had any other ranking in the top 100, and in the first week alone, it came out and it was #1. And we've never heard of it, most of us. And to date, it's not like when songs come out today, they're not just songs, they're also videos. Most of us know this. And of course, where would it be in today's world other than YouTube, right? On YouTube, Rich Men North of Richmond, 46 million views. The song isn't just powerful, it's also viral. The artist, Oliver Anthony, in the YouTube video, he's alone in the forest, just by himself, and with his dog by his side. I can appreciate that to a certain extent. He gives voice in this moment, in this aloneness, to the absolute loneliness, aloneness, and the frustration that many of us feel. His song is about social and economic despair. It taps into a widespread feeling that the system is broken. It reflects personal pain. So many of our systems are failing, and ordinary people are truly suffering. His song was a real awakening moment for me, both because of the message, but also how the message resonated with so many in its sheer popularity, and that virtually no one I knew of had heard of it. The song in it has no reason for hope. Everything in the song is about futility. And we know that without hope, people look for someone to blame, often turning to simple narratives that offer easy answers to deep, complex problems. And historically, this is exactly where anti-Semitism finds its foothold. In times of social and economic despair, narratives about powerful hidden elites controlling systems are dangerously appealing. People want to believe that their suffering isn't random or part of some uncontrollable system. They want to believe that someone out there is responsible. And the problem is, if this hopelessness is unchecked, it can be directed at scapegoats. Populist movements draw upon this. They promise to give power back to people while simultaneously vilifying elites, sometimes explicitly, as we all know, Jewish elites. Rich Men North of Richmond plays into the idea that elites are controlling ordinary people. It echoes old, dangerous ideas. The song itself likely may not, even though some have offered, be anti-Semitic, I pray. But the message that it promotes about elites controlling and oppressing the many, this can be co-opted and used definitely by anti-Semites for their agendas. Without hope, division deepens. Without hope, anger festers. Without hope, scapegoats and us were found. And this is why it's so important on Yom Kippur to address the root causes of despair. Today, Americans are almost at each other's throats. Political divisions are tearing us apart. Communities, families, friendships are being divided and separated. Each election cycle, each time, these divisions just seem to grow deeper, more personal, more irreparable. The weight of the division just feels heavier, and the hope for resolution feels more distant. This feeling of hopelessness is real, but it's not necessarily, my friends, permanent. Both Judaism and America, they both teach a story that light can break through the darkness. When there is division, there can be healing. And where there is injustice, justice can rise. This is what it means to be American. This is what it means to be Jewish, to believe in that story of hope, and that despair does not need to consume us. Other songs, American songs, grapple with profound absurdities and manage still in those absurdities of time to find a thread of resilience, a commitment to hope despite overwhelming odds. Sam Cooke's A Change is Going to Come addresses the pain of the civil rights struggle in America, where systemic racism still persists in a country that prides ourselves on, of all values, equality. The song opens with, "I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just by the river. I've been running ever since." And yet, there's a hopeful refrain. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know a change is going to come. Oh, yes, it will. Despite the challenges, despite the difficulties, the song clings that justice, while delayed, is inevitable. Bob Dylan's Blowing with the Wind. It deals with the cycle, the endless cycle of violence. The lyrics pose unanswerable questions. How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? And yet the refrain, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. That glimpse of optimism amid the chaos. The songs remind us that while despair is a natural response to a broken world, it's how we deal with the despair that defines us. And there is another path. We do not need to blame. We don't need to divide. We don't need to succumb to darkness. Despair is not the end. It's the courage to say, I may see a solution yet, but I will keep seeking out how to find a way out. When the way forward seems unclear, it's the courage to believe not yet does not mean never. It's the courage to say, I may not feel understood yet, but I keep speaking my truth. And when we feel weak or vulnerable, it's the courage to say, I may not feel strong yet, but I'll take it one day at a time. I may not see it yet, but I'll keep going, step by step. You see, not yet is more than just a delay to slow us down. Not yet is a defiant declaration of our deepest values, a bold refusal to not surrender in the face of incredible obstacles. It teaches us that while the answers of relief may be delayed, they are not forever denied. Life's unfairness can often make us question whether it's worth to continue, but the sacred invitation of not yet is to not surrender to that despair. The idea of not yet is taught in one of the very earliest stories of humanity, the story of Cain and Abel in the Bible. Cain is a farmer. He works, he toils hard as a farmer, and he offers the fruit of his labor to God. His brother Abel is a shepherd and offers a portion of his flock. Cain offers the fruit and Abel a piece of meat. God accepts Abel's offering, but then rejects Cain's. It seems absurd that Cain's offering would be rejected by God. Like many of us, Cain feels the absurdity of the moment, and he feels it deeply. He works, he toils, and again he offers his best, and yet his offering now is rejected by God. And then Cain is invited, though, to rise above it. But instead, he chooses destruction. God sees this despair, and he speaks to Cain. If you do what is right, you will not be accepted? God sees Cain's choice. And despite the rejection, God asks Cain to not give up on life. Instead, God provides us with a profound teaching, the not yet, to respond to life's challenges. God is giving Cain a lesson here, and one that applies to us all. God chooses and asks us to choose that life is always the not yet. God didn't condemn Cain, but instead offered him a different pathway forward. God urges Cain to see in his struggles not yet, not as an end. Our struggles, our disappointments, our heartaches, our divisions, they're never the final word. Sometimes we're asked to choose not yet, even in the most dire of circumstances. Rami Davidian is a 58-year-old farmer in Israel living just 10 miles from the Gaza Strip on October 7th. Generally, his work is to distribute fuel all across communities in the Gaza envelope. And so he was very familiar with the terrain as well as the challenges of everyday life with the people there. He knew them well. He was part of that larger community. And over the years, Rami was that go-to guy that you went to in the case of an emergency. On October 7th, when the initial rocket fire began, Rami's friend's son was in danger at the Rim grave, and Rami's response was instinctual. When he arrived at the festival site, terrorists were literally everywhere, and people were desperately fleeing for their lives. Amid the gunfire, he then went to the site with his truck and started loading as many people into his vehicle. 15 on that very first trip, 15 lives saved. And then he went back again and again and again. Each time he could have stopped, each time he could have said, I did enough. But at incredible peril, he chose not yet. He chose to return. Going back in that truck was the difference between life and death. And amidst the terror, amidst overwhelming odds, he chose not yet. And he saved a lot of lives. Throughout the day, Rami's phone buzzed again and again with all those people that he knew. Parents were terrified. Children were lost. Can you imagine being one of those parents? And every time he answered the phone, he said not yet. He wasn't going to let those parents down. At one point, he faced 6 terrorists with a woman that was being held hostage. And Rami was unarmed and outnumbered 6-1. With no gun, he could have just moved on. What if that was our daughter, our sister, our wife, our mother? And so he relied on his Arabic, knowing that with one wrong word, he could be dead. But he chose not yet. He pretended to be one of them. And amazingly, he rescued the woman. A friend's family member called, pleading, please help find my son. I don't know where he is. I haven't heard from him. So he went, and then he found the young man dead. He knew this person, and so he felt, he says, like he was collapsing under grief. But yet again, he chose not yet. He kept moving forward in that day. As night fell, another call came, and this time it was a woman hiding in the orchard under the cover of darkness. And in the darkness, she was completely surrounded by terrorists. That darkness could have been the end of her. And Rami, after a whole day of saving lives, could have said, you know what? This is just too dangerous, in the dark with all these terrorists, to save one woman. But he didn't turn away. He chose not yet, and yes, he miraculously led her to safety. Rami said later, I didn't act like Rambo. I did it quietly, and that's how I succeeded. his humility and his strategic approach helped him save 750 lives that day. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about recognition. As every life hung in the balance, he chose not yet. When faced with overwhelming obstacles in American and Jewish life, there's a message that transcends our politics or our persuasions. Choosing life of not yet is not just about the extremes of life and death. Life's unfairness can often make us question whether it's worth continuing. But the sacred invitation is not to descend and to despair endlessly. There is another path. We do not need to blame. We do not need to divide. We don't need to succumb into this despair of darkness. Not yet moments, whether it's life and death or everyday lives, or when we realize that the setbacks are not temporary, they're never final. Judaism calls us to build a community of not yet, a space where life, when it feels overwhelming, we choose life together. I've seen it right here. Not yet, when friends divided by political differences could have just held themselves and one another in resentment and stopped talking to each other. But instead, we sat and listened and heard one another and appreciated each other's perspectives. We refused to let our relationships break under the weight of division. I've seen it when acts of hatred let us become afraid and can rule our hearts that we're asked and seek to turn inwards. And yet I've seen it again, we continue on. Not yet is a belief that love can prevail. We seek opportunities to rise above, to raise awareness, and to continue bridge building. We do that every day. Not yet is that opportunity in our lives. It's also when we fought, lost, and felt terrible disappointments individually, communally, in our world. But then we still decide, not yet, to show up for support, to show up for learning, to show up for growth, to show up for each other. We keep moving forward, one step at a time. Instead of giving into the darkness of extremism, we choose not yet. Rising up, getting up from what being down, from being in despair, is the most profound expression of not yet. The Hebrew word for returning to Israel, aliyah, after 2,000 years of exile, comes from that root word, to rise up. Every time there's a new aliyah who arrives in Israel, it's a profound embodiment of the Jewish people returning and reclaiming from exile, not yet. The Jewish spirit of self-determination, of the belief of Zion, of her people under the land, that rising up will not be defeated because it's part of who we are. And each time we're called to the Torah, what's the word that we say? We have an aliyah, the same word. We rise up to the Torah. Every time we engage with Judaism, every time we come together as a family of Solel, every time we're living our Jewish lives in the sanctuary and in the world, we are saying to ourselves, to one another, we are not giving up on our faith, not yet, not ever. Aliyah, rising up, it's never to stay down. It's to say not yet. We are getting back up. We will continue to rise. Aliyah is to rise toward the light. Aliyah is to say that the darkness won't consume us. Our whole country is facing a not yet moment. All of Israel is facing a not yet moment. I would even propose all of humanity may be facing a not yet moment. We've been here before. One time that was poignant in my life was on 9/11. That was to me, and I'm sure to most of us, another not yet moment. And I happened to be living and working in the city. My offices were in downtown Manhattan, only a few blocks away from the towers. I remember how New Yorkers, how devastating that moment was, and not just for New Yorkers, for Americans all across the country. Devastating losses. And yet, what did America say? What is it like to be in downtown Manhattan today? What is it like to live in Israel today? After 2,000 years of exile, despite all the hardships. In that moment of pain, there was a song that resonated with me. You probably have heard of it. Bruce Springsteen's The Rising. It captures the universal theme of rising above our challenges. It's so different than Richmond, north of Richmond. The idea of rising again, of saying, I won't sit down, it's a beacon that guides Judaism and guides America. Hear Springsteen's verses from The Rising. Can't see nothing in front of me. Can't see nothing coming up behind. I make my way through this darkness. I can't feel nothing but this chain that binds me. Come on up for the rising. Come on up, lay your hands in mine. Come on up for the rising. Come on up for the rising tonight. Right now, the question before us is whether we will succumb to the forces that proclaim that the end is near and we surrender to despair, or whether we continue to strive, to hope, and to assert our Jewish self-determination and the future of America with pride and with promise. Living Jewishly, living as an American, is a choice always of not yet. It's our decision to keep building, to keep reaching across divides, and to keep rising up, and to moving forward, my friends, with faith. We don't know what the year ahead will bring. Our legacy, though, as Jews and as American Jews, is a legacy of that not yet spirit. When despair creeps in, when it gets a hold of us, let us say not yet. Let us live our lives to build, to heal, to save, and to hope for. We shall say, I am not staying down. I am not living in despair. Not now. Not ever. We shall rise up. We shall continue on. And we shall all, always choose life. Ken Yiratzon, may it be God's will. And let us say, Amen. Amen.